I don't fish alone a lot, but I have had some pretty profound moments by myself, just spiritually, and just like good for my soul and just connected to something bigger than myself and feeling very small.
I used to camp up here when I was a kid. I remember one day in the Wooden Service, they asked, "Where do you want to be in 5 years in this outfit?" And I remember saying, "District Game Warden in Rangeley, Maine." And I got there in 3 years, so I was very fortunate.
Grief is just this great big bag of love, but it ain't got any place to go. It changes how you look at everything. It changes how you think. It changes everything for the rest of your life.
Welcome to the Flyline Podcast, where we enjoy the interesting stories behind the legendary guides and luminaries connected to Maine fishing. I'm Michael Jones. Today, I'm joined by my producer and partner, Sheri Maines, as we reflect on 4 seasons of the Flyline Podcast. What began during COVID as a simple idea to preserve the stories connected to Maine fishing has grown into 48 episodes featuring guides, writers, conservationists, artists, and storytellers from across the state and beyond. Along the way, the podcast has become a place where guests can share not only what they've done, but also the experiences, relationships, and moments that have shaped their lives on and around the water. In this episode, we look back on how the podcast evolved over 4 seasons, what we've learned from recording these conversations, and why storytelling has remained at the center of the show from the very beginning. We also get a glimpse into Sheri's early years of fishing, along with a story of how Sheri and I first met and eventually came together to build the podcast. It's a conversation about Maine, storytelling, friendship, and the people generous enough to share their lives and experiences with us along the way. Sheri Maines, welcome to the Flyline Podcast.
Thanks, Michael.
Yeah, well, tell everyone where we're at and tell everyone what we just did.
Well, we just got back from the Bahamas, and we are at home now.
Yeah, we're at home on a kind of a drizzly May night. And
Very drizzly and a little too cold, if you ask me.
yeah, your blood got really thin down there 2 weeks, 88 degrees the day we left.
Yeah.
But the goal of this episode is to recap basically 4 years of our journey together, bringing this product to the people. And I want to, go back to the beginning and talk about what we learned. And I want to share about how it changed over time and how we, I like to think we evolved and maybe got more comfortable with the product that we were trying to put out and some of the feedback that we got from the people and the guests and all that. Before we get into some of those things, though, I think it's important for the audience to know who this second partner is in the Flyline Podcast, and that's you, Sheri.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you were there from the first step, really. I think when I initially had the idea, we talked about it a little bit, and it was just before Christmas years ago, however many years ago it was, 5 years ago. And I said, Sheri, I think I want to do a podcast. And your reaction was?
Absolutely. Let me help you. And so I was really supportive and figured you'd just be on it. I'd never done a podcast before. So for Christmas, I got you a Podcasting for Dummies book and a little podcasting kit. You remember that?
Yeah. And just explain for the audience what that kit was.
It was like some sort of a mixing board and
a microphone
and what else?
It had some cables and cords, and
yeah.
I don't think we ever used it.
I know I tried to set it up, and it was really confusing.
Yeah, it was not made for dummies, for sure.
No.
Yeah, because you're not a dummy.
Wow.
And about you, Sheri, I just wanted, again, for the audience let's tell the audience a little bit about, what your professional work is outside of doing podcasting with me. You have a real job.
Yes.
What do you do?
Well, I work at IDEX. My role is to lead global communications and analytics for our environmental health and safety team.
There you go.
And essentially, I handle data on incident management because basically environmental health and safety is another word for the safety department.
Yeah.
So more than data, I really have a fantastic job there where I get to use my creative side at work as well. And I get to really figure out ways to help our culture for our employees in just bringing the importance of safety to light within a global company. And it's really fun.
Yeah. So I'm trying to remember if you were working for IDEX when we started the podcast.
Let's see. I had just got my job.
Right.
Yeah, I
Right.
just got my job there.
Yeah.
So before that, I worked at a large oil company.
Yeah.
Here in Maine, and
Now,
I,
go ahead and brag on yourself a little bit. What did you do for them?
I was the lead administrative assistant.
Yeah.
And worked at the corporate office.
Yeah.
Supported the executives and the upper level managers there,
Right.
and I worked there for 15 years.
Yeah.
And I learned a lot.
You did. And you kind of hit the glass ceiling where you couldn't go any further. They did offer you another job, but you also were, looking to kind of branch out, and IDEX had a position that you thought it showed more progress for a growth ladder for you.
Well, the truth of the matter is I had really been actively applying to work at IDEX for a couple of years.
Right.
And had applied for several positions there. And I just never stopped. I kept looking. I knew I wanted to work at IDEX.
No, that's how you are.
And I know. Bird dog.
Yeah, bird dogging it.
Bird dog. So they did eventually, at the same moment when I had this feeling I was going to get this job at IDEX, my managers asked me to apply for the office manager role at the corporate office. And because I wasn't sure yet.
I remember this well.
Right.
Yeah.
I did go through the process of applying because, you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket. But
there was a 48-hour window of us doing a lot of nail biting.
yeah.
Like they wanted you to accept the position they offered you at your current job, but yet you were like, well, what?
Yeah, send me that in writing so I can look at it over the weekend. And
exactly.
That's exactly what happened. And
yeah, well, at the same time, I mean, you were stalling, but at this,
Yeah.
you had high hopes that you were going to get the job that you did get, and now you're flourishing there. But let's talk also about you and I, because we've only been together, have 7 years now. How long have we been together now?
That's okay. I think 5 or 6. 5 or 6.
Oh, I think it's longer than that now.
You think so?
I do. Yeah, well, it doesn't matter. But
Yeah.
the point of the matter is we met during COVID, and you were living over in Sebago in your house. We've both been married before. We're both divorced. You have children. I do not. And we met online.
Yeah.
And there was a photo of you with a smallmouth bass in your hand.
It was a largemouth bass.
Okay. Well, it
Yeah.
was a largemouth bass.
We'll put it on the blog
You
post.
still have the photo?
I still have it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I saw that, and I thought to myself, kind of like Carol Ware, ooh, I like her.
Yeah.
And plus you're cute as a button. So we went out on our first date, and I said, do you want to go hiking or do you want to go fishing?
And I said, fishing.
Yeah. And I found out you were a serious fisher.
Yeah. Well, I taught myself.
Yeah.
The person that was really into fishing when I was a kid was my grandfather, who passed away when I was 7. So I really didn't have a ton of exposure to fishing, except for that I myself wanted to do it. And I was really passionate about it. I grew up in my younger years on Watchick Lake in Standish, and every chance I could, I brought my little fishing rod. It was just this little white, I don't even know what it was, but it was just a little white rod, probably a child's size. And I'd go down to the inlet and I'd just go fishing.
Yeah.
I'd just catch little lake trout and perch.
Yeah.
And absolutely loved it.
And we're talking when you were like well under 10 years old.
Yeah, I was like, I think I got my first fishing pole when I was like, I don't know, 8 or 9.
Right.
And I taught myself everything I knew.
Yeah.
Because my grandfather had already passed by then.
Yeah.
But I taught myself how to properly tie a hook. If you didn't tied that hook on there, you were going to lose it. So I figured out how to tie.
Yeah.
It might not have been properly, but I did figure out how to get it on there.
So it wouldn't break.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think we both shared that we grew up in Maine and grew up fishing
Yeah.
back when we didn't have iPhones and all that sort of thing. That, our outlet was to go outdoors and do
Oh,
that.
yeah.
And you did that.
Mm-hmm.
And so we spent a lot of the time our first year dating was on fishing trips, doing stuff together
Oh, yeah.
out of the drift boat. And you loved to bass fish. And
It was great because the one thing we always tell everybody who asks about how we met was I had absolutely no idea that you were a guide. And I also had no idea what a guide was.
right.
So even if you had told me, I would have been like, okay, whatever. I just had no idea what a guide was.
Yeah.
And so I remember when you asked me if I wanted to go hiking or fishing, and I said fishing 100%, then I was just floored at the amount of detail you put into this fishing trip date. And you're like, okay, meet me at this address, which was your house here, at 7 in the morning. I'm like, geez, that's early for, I'm like, okay, well, that sounds fun. So I got here at 7, probably right on the dot, because that's who I am. And I see your boat, and I'm like, wow, he's even got a boat. So we went out to the river, which I had never been on a river like that. And even that day, I still didn't really understand that you were a guide. I thought you were just really into fishing.
I probably didn't tell you at that
I don't
point.
think you did.
Yeah, I wouldn't. That's my nature to not say anything like that, especially where it was our first date. I would have just taken you out. But yeah, I'm pretty serious about it.
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah. Well, we, fast forward from there and we live together now. You sold your house in Sebago to your best friend, Nicole.
Mm-hmm.
And, so we're over in Naples and we've got this podcast going along. And, it was during COVID when we started the podcast, and meaning it was frowned upon to go to someone's house or to their workplace and sit down with them. It wasn't the right thing to do at the time. So when I started the idea of having a podcast and then inviting people to be on it, we were using laptop computers and having, not like
Virtual.
Yeah, virtual, like
meeting.
Teams meeting type,
It was called Riverside. And so some of our earliest episodes, you'll hear us say that it was powered by Riverside, which it was.
Yeah.
And essentially, you're right. They're like Zoom meetings, but Riverside had a reputation for having quality recordings through that. And it was pretty successful. We did have a couple of issues and hiccups along the way, but
we couldn't have done a video podcast based on the technology we were using. I mean, I was remembering with like the Bill Pierce podcast, we're talking to Bill, we can see Bill. He hasn't had a haircut in a long time because COVID's going on.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, when we start talking, the buffering happens. And although we can hear him, we can't see him anymore.
Right.
And then when we had Brad Burns on, there were times where it just literally cut out. Like I'd have to call him on my cell phone and be like, Brad, are you still around? He's like, yeah, I don't know what happened. I'm like, well, I don't know what happened either.
Yeah.
But we just pick up. And so, not too far along the path, and I can't remember exactly when it happened, but I think it was when we interviewed the governor, that it was really the first time, or it was the first time.
It was. And I remember this because we were accustomed to doing our recordings from my office or your office. It's,
Right.
One of our offices at home. And we were sending out a Riverside link, and then they were meeting us virtually, whereas the governor wanted us to go to Augusta and interview her along with Judy Camuso in
In the State House.
In the State House, in that room.
Yeah, in the cabinet room.
Yeah. And I was really worried about how we were going to get a quality recording. And so I did a ton of research, and I found that there was a handheld device, which is called a Zoom, believe it's, not a virtual meeting Zoom, but this device is called a Zoom.
Yep.
And it's got like multi-directional.
Microphones.
Yeah, I can't really explain it. It's very, in my opinion, bare bones. You just hit a button and it starts to record.
Yeah, it's like podcasting for dummies.
It is. Yeah, right. It's actually easier than that, little kit that I got.
Yeah, it's basically a smart microphone that has a small SD card in it.
Yeah.
And a micro SD card in it. And I just carry it to wherever I go. And every interview I've done, I think every interview I've done since that one in season 1 has been in person. And it just adds so much more to it for me. I think the conversations are more genuine. When you're looking at somebody, you can tell, they say so much of communication is nonverbal. So I can tell if someone wants to jump in, or they can tell if I want to jump in and say something. And that just lends itself to a more casual conversation, which I think in the end is more meaningful for the audience to listen to.
I agree with you.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that when we recorded the governor and Judy Camuso, I remember I set up Riverside because that's what we were accustomed to using. And so I set it up with one-way recording.
Yeah.
And I used this little Zoom, a handheld device, and set it up for the very first time and quickly found out that that was the way to go from then on out.
Yeah. And the other part of it that I remember was, I think that was the same point that we started using basically background noise cancellation and volume equalization. So if you've got an older person and they kind of talk very quietly and slow, and then my booming voice is talking over it, it would basically equalize the volume of the 2 speakers or the 3 speakers or 4, depending on whatever the episode was.
Yeah.
And it would even everybody out. And that was great.
It works amazingly well. Not to keep picking on the Governor Mills and Judy Camuso, but Judy's voice was extremely quiet. And when I heard the raw audio, I was really worried about how that was going to turn out. And I ran it through our software. I couldn't believe how it just brought her voice up and evened everything out. And it sounds great.
So, put it through our software. What are we using for software now? Share with the audience. When I hand you a recording of a conversation I had with someone that's an hour and a half long, walk through the steps of what you do.
Well, I'll just preface this example by saying that it's probably not the right way or the easiest way,
Right.
but it works for us. And so I just take that recording, I put it into Descript.
That
is a software. It's like $30 a month for a subscription. It's an incredible software because you put the audio in there and then it transcribes it, not perfectly, but good enough. And so when you make any edits, like when you go through and take out the ums and the ahs and close gaps and, spaces between thoughts or whatever, it's so easy because you can see it like you're editing a Word document.
Yeah. And when I'm watching you do it, I'm seeing 2 things. I'm seeing you're looking at a script, literally like reading a script like for a movie, the conversation that's going on it's not accurate, like you said, but it's mostly accurate.
Yeah.
And then I also see, you've got the spikes of the voices, loud and quiet, and you can literally see where someone stops talking and starts talking and cut, move, pull, push.
Yeah. And I'm also listening to it on headphones as well. And so as I'm editing those parts, I can hear whether or not it sounds natural or if I need to increase a gap or decrease a gap or take out. A lot of people will have a and or and the way they say it, sometimes it ties into their next sentence, and if you try to take it out, it doesn't sound natural. So in those cases, I just leave it in.
Yeah.
But for the most part, I really focus on like the first 10 minutes or so of really trying to take out the ums and the ahs and anything, just because in the first 10 minutes, guests are starting to warm up. And so it's just that beginning of the conversation. And then as they go, we get more used to listening to ums and ahs, and they get more used to not having to say them as much. So
Yeah.
just it evens out over time. It's just one of the things I've learned. Then after that, I take that audio and export it. And then this is where I know it's probably not the easiest or the best way to do it, but it works for me because, a creature of habit, let's say. But I have this software called Movavi, and it's a movie editing software. And I have templates created of our intros, the flashback music, the outros. And so I just pop it in there, and then I figure out where everything belongs. And then I silence the music, take out the audio. Then I push it through something called Auphonic.
Right.
And that is not a downloadable software. It's online. And that's where I don't know. I figured out the right levels at one point, and then I created a template for it, and I've been using it ever since because it just works. So,
What does that program do to the product?
it that's the program that actually does the voice leveling,
Balancing.
the balancing,
Yeah.
the leveling. I mean, I could do it within Descript. I could do it within the movie software. I just don't because Auphonic works so well. So I just, like I said,
Yeah.
not the easy way, but it just works.
Yeah, so very often when we listen, you and I will sit down with a bowl of popcorn and say, let's listen into the raw interview, just so you and I can kind of storyboard about what we want to keep and what we want to move around, because sometimes we'll even move a conversation around a little bit if it seems to fit better somewhere else.
Yeah.
And when we're listening to it there, that's when it's out of balance and someone's quiet, someone's loud.
Or you hear a dog barking or whatever, and Auphonic will actually take out any background noise. A great example of that, and you wouldn't know it by listening to it, but the Emily Bastian episode.
Yeah.
You two were sitting were you like in a cube?
No, we were at Pineland Farms outside in Grey New Gloucester because that's near where Emily lives. And we were sitting in a gazebo outside, and there were ATVs going by. There were people fishing in the pond. There were 18-wheelers, Jake braking coming down the road in Grey New Gloucester. And Emily was just an angel in that she knew when I was looking at her with that funny look that, let's just stop talking for a second and let this noise pass.
Yeah.
But that's an example that you were making the point that you were able to cancel out
Right.
background noise.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there were kids screaming at some point, and
Yeah.
I was just amazed after putting it through the Auphonic software that it took all that out. It was amazing.
Yeah. And I'm thinking too, when going back to podcasting for dummies, it wasn't completely invaluable. There was some content in the reading that I did because there was a book that came along with it.
Right.
This is a Christmas gift you gave me.
Yeah.
And I read it. And they said that successful podcast, and this is when podcasts were really early. I mean, there's probably millions of podcasts around the world now.
It's still really early, but you're right. It's even before it was really early.
Exactly. We were definitely pioneers, especially in Maine. But I remembered reading, keep it about an hour, give the people a break in the middle, and also, make it so that it's interesting to listen to, which is an easy thing to say, but a hard thing to do.
Right.
And so that's what created the template that we have of an intro, a conversation, in our case, a flyline flashback, which is a break in the middle, and then you come back. So it's really like 20, 25 minutes, a little bit of flashback in the middle, and then another 20, 25 minutes, maybe 30 or 40 if it's longer. And then we do an outro and it's done. And so that actually worked well because one of the things that's happened is we found that when you compare our podcast to other outdoor podcasts and, fly fishing podcasts in New England and around the country, we have a tremendously high retention rate. People turn it on and they don't shut it off.
Right.
They actually listen to it through. And that's a matrix which is measured by Podbean,
Yeah.
YouTube, Apple Podcasts.
Well, it's Podbean and YouTube.
Yeah. So, you're able to look at the analytics of it and say, hey, not only are people listening, they're not just playing it, they're actually listening to it.
Right.
And that's really what also increases our rankings.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I start to wonder sometimes, should we keep doing this? It's that has my heart in it. It keeps me coming back to you saying, Sheri, people really like this.
Yeah. And for me, it's more than the metrics. It's hearing how, strangers are walking up to you and saying, do you have a podcast? I heard your voice from around the corner, and I think you're Michael Jones.
It's crazy. I never would have in my wildest dreams imagined that. To me, it was almost like voyeurism. I was like hiding in a closet somewhere with a podcast interviewing people that I wanted to talk to.
Yeah.
And little did I know, or did we know, the audience we were reaching. And I remember at one point, you and I were waking up one morning in bed and you're like, Michael, people are downloading this in Ireland. We have a listener in Australia.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. We have listeners all over the world.
It's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's a testimony to what Maine fly fishing is in terms of its legacy. I think there's something weird about Maine when it comes to fly fishing that maybe it's not weird. It's just unique to Maine and maybe the Catskills in New York and parts of Vermont and of course out west. But there's something really unique about Maine where Carrie Stevens and the Gray Ghost and Herb Welch and the Black Ghost and all the, classic rod companies for cane rod building and just the heritage of people coming to Maine over all those years and all the flashbacks we did about Fly Rod Crosby and the trains and people going to Mount Kineo Hotel and all these things speak to a piece of history, which, I kind of take it for granted because I'm a Mainer. I've spent my whole life here. You spent your whole life here.
Mm-hmm.
And we're soon to forget that there's people that, maybe don't love their life as much as we love our lives. And they live vicariously through the podcast, listening to these conversations because they might be going to work for some hedge fund down in Connecticut, but for 2 weeks a year, they go up to Maine and spend some time and do a little fly fishing. And that's really where their heart lives. And that's kind of part of the audience that we've captured. It's been people all around the world and all around the country. And that's true. The story you said, I was literally in the hardware store one day, just having casual conversations with a guy. And he looks me square in the eye and says, do you have a podcast? I'm like, yeah, matter of fact, I do. Why? He's like, because I listen to it all the time. Oh my God, I can't believe it. And he went up to the cashier and, do you know who's in the store right now? And it was like, David Letterman. No, not quite. But yeah, it's funny how we don't, and that's how it goes. And, it's also, when we talk about success, I'm noticing that we're getting emails from people that want to go on trips.
Yeah.
That are total strangers.
Well, you got a call out of the blue just the other day by somebody you didn't know who, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
They just called and said, I listened to your podcast and I'd like to go fishing with you.
Yeah. It happens more than I would have expected.
Yeah.
And that just, again, it's like you put this out there and you don't know what's going to happen or how it's going to come back to benefit you. But it has. And, and it goes in two directions. It makes us feel really, really good when we get an email from someone that says, hey, I listened to that Aldro French podcast and it reminded me of a time when I was fishing at the Rapid River and I almost fell out of the back of his pickup truck because he was giving us a ride. I think he forgot we were riding on the tailgate. And
right.
It's little anecdotal bits of feedback that we get that just really kind of warms our hearts and makes our hearts go pitter pat, and it makes you feel like you're on the right track. And, and plus we're getting rich.
We're not getting rich.
No, so let's talk.
We're getting the opposite of rich.
Yeah, no, it costs us money to do this.
It does cost us money.
Yeah, and it's not it's not something that has been easy to do financially, because when you think about the equipment and the subscriptions that we have to sign up for to basically create the final product, I've always felt that from the onset, I wanted this to be a legacy project. In other words, I wanted it to be something where we were recording a piece of history, and some old man is going to die and his family is going to have an hour-long conversation he talks about his life and how fly fishing guided him through his career. I don't know if he was a writer or if he was, whoever, or a woman, whoever this person is. I always felt that it was important. We can't interview Carrie Stevens.
Mm-hmm.
We can't interview Fly Rod Crosby, but we can start today.
Right.
And there's some really important people, Bonnie Holden, as an example.
Right.
She's in great health right now, but everyone knows her. And there's so much about her life that people don't know about. And that's what podcasting does. And that's the kind of feedback that I hear from the listeners all the time, especially when, like a lot of my fly fishing clients that I go out with, when we're sitting, inside the gunnels of the boat during the day, they'll turn around and say, "Hey, I listened to that podcast you did with Macaulay Lord, and I didn't know that he was into ministry."
Yeah.
And so there's always these degrees of, I know this person, but I didn't know this about them.
Right.
And that's exactly the bullseye of what I was trying to do, because I am so fortunate that I do know a lot of the people. Don't know all of the people, but I know a lot of the people that we've had on the podcast. And I always learn something about them that I didn't know. And that is very revealing. And I think it's also what keeps people listening. I had Gene Barr carve a fish for me, and I never knew that guy was from Alabama.
Mm-hmm.
I never knew that Bob Dion lost his daughter,
Right.
to cancer. And, I always went in his fly shop, and he was a hell of a nice guy, but I didn't know his backstory. And then I heard his podcast, and it just opened my eyes to a lot of things I didn't know. And for every guest, there's a story.
Right.
And I always kind of try to remind the guests when I'm talking to them before we start recording, I say, a podcast is nothing without stories.
Right.
I don't want to hear you talk about selling this product that you're making. I want to hear you tell me about your life that led up to you building this company or this thing or this.
Whatever inspires you. I remember when you and I were, before we did even the first interview, and we were trying to define what we wanted this to look like. And mutually, you and I decided that we wanted to make sure that we were getting to the heart of people so that we could really capture not just the history in like a textbook way, but really get to the heart of people so that, because that's who we are as Mainers.
Yeah.
And I'm really proud of the work that we've done and the conversations you've had. I mean, honestly, the conversations, you're the one that really draws that out of people. And I want to take a minute to commend you for the work that you've done to just have those genuine conversations with people and making them feel comfortable with telling you their lives, and some of that very personal, and they're willing to share it and even allow us to put it in a podcast. But it's because they trust you.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it's a real privilege to be in the presence of somebody that's really opening up about something that's deep and meaningful to them. And what an honor it is to be in the custody of presenting that to people to hear for the first time. And I've developed my skill set on that, not just through podcasting, but through guiding. A lot of the people that you spend a day with guiding, you've guided before, and you're building on the experience you had with them before. And, you might have a quiet moment in the day and you'll say, how's your daughter Lydia doing? And you just shut up and let them talk. And that's a really important skill to have, is to listen. Because people will tell you their story if you give them an opportunity to do it.
Yeah.
And I I think the foundation of a good podcast is a good story. And to set the story up is really an art in itself, is to ask the right questions.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, as an example, I can think of the first season or two, I would have, 20 or 30 questions all written down like a news reporter to ask. And I don't even go into a podcast interview with a script now. I might do a lot of research about somebody and have that kind of captured in my mind about the kinds of things I want to talk to them about. But I just kind of freeball it, if you will, which is to say, let the conversation just unfold and remind myself, I want to talk to this person about that. And
I like it that you do that, because I remember, it seems to me that when you were kind of using a guideline with questions in a certain order, it felt like it was more important to you to keep the chronological order of it, just so. And so if anything got skipped, then we were constantly moving things around. Whereas now there's a flow to it. And so even if you end up coming back to something that you previously touched on, we don't really move things around that much anymore. I think that the conversation flows better.
Yeah. And there'll be times too, I can think where I'll come back from doing an interview and I'll say, Sheri, mental note, after we take a break, this person tells a great story about such and such. And it doesn't need to live where it does in the interview. We need to put it somewhere else because it belongs connected to that story that they talked about their wife dying or whatever it was. And so you and I work together to make sure that it all is connected in a way that is relevant to the listener.
Yeah.
And so it's not just me driving the conversation. It's me coming back after having a conversation, because not all conversations are linear and not all conversations are perfect.
Yeah.
So now all of a sudden you and I have to sit down and say, I can think, we're not going to use names, but I can think of one of the interviews we had in season 3 where the guest was nervous. And, we interviewed and talked and had some really good dialogue, but it wasn't meaningful and great and heartfelt. And then all of a sudden, after taking a break, and actually we had lunch, coming back, and he starts telling me these really deep and meaningful stories about his early childhood. And it occurred to me there was like some really good stuff right there.
Mm-hmm.
We just flipped it.
Yeah.
We put that stuff right in the beginning. And
I remember that. And it actually turned out to be one of our best, most popular episodes.
It's our most popular episode, and that person will go unnamed, but they've become close friends.
Yeah.
And I just remembered that was a learning thing for us, was like, if I'm listening to this myself and I'm not interested because this person is nervous or they're just maybe apprehensive, they're holding back, they don't know me well enough to share. And then all of a sudden, an hour later, they're just telling me right straight from the heart.
Yeah.
We want more of that.
Right.
Yeah. And there's a lot of times when I'm interviewing somebody where I'll be thinking to myself, we've got an hour, but I don't have a conversation yet. I need another, and I know you hate me for doing this when I come home with a 2.5 hour long recording, but
an hour already takes me, like, how long would you say?
6 hours. It takes you all day.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for the audience, every time you listen to one episode, Sheri has basically given away 1 day of her life to produce it. It's huge. Yeah. If I put in an hour or 2 of recording, she puts in 4 times that amount to 6 times to 8 times that amount in doing the edit. So God bless you for the work that you do. Let's take a short break. Let's come back. And I want to talk specifically about some of the episodes that we had and some of the conversations that we really enjoyed.
Okay.
In this Flyline flashback, we head to Central Maine to look at a man who spent most of his life teaching, guiding, writing, and preserving the kind of outdoor knowledge once passed down hand to hand in Maine. Gil Gilpatrick spent 26 years teaching outdoor resources at the Skowhegan Regional Vocational Center, helping students learn practical outdoor skills tied directly to Maine's woods and waters. He became widely known as a canoe designer and builder, an avid outdoorsman, and a registered Maine guide. Outside the classroom, Gil guided wilderness canoe trips through northern Maine for over 40 years, traveling the same remote rivers and watersheds that shaped generations of Maine guides and outdoorsmen. His work connected craftsmanship with experience, not just teaching people how to use outdoor gear, but often how to build it themselves. Gil became especially known for his handcrafted canoes, snowshoes, and outdoor equipment. His approach was simple and practical. See a need, build something to solve it. But unlike many outdoor innovators, he chose not to turn most of his work into commercial products. Instead, he shared his knowledge through teaching, writing, and small-scale craftsmanship. That philosophy carried into his books, which became well-known in Maine outdoor circles. His titles included Building a Strip Canoe, Building Snowshoes, The Canoe Guide's Handbook, and Allagash, the story of Maine's legendary wilderness waterway. He also wrote regularly for Maine's Northwood Sporting Journal, becoming part of Maine's long tradition of outdoor writers who focused as much on skills and experience as they did on fish and game. In 2010, Gil received the Wiggy Robinson Legendary Maine Guide Award from the Maine Professional Guides Association and his peers, recognizing a lifetime of excellence connected to Maine's outdoor traditions. Gil Gilpatrick's legacy represents a very Maine kind of outdoor culture, handmade, resilient, self-reliant, and passed down through experience instead of mass production. And now, back to the second half of this episode. So we're coming back from the break, and I want to just back up to the beginning again, because the beginning to me, I was working in a different capacity than I am now. I was working for an industrial engineering company that was really growing and prospering. And we decided when we were going to start the podcast that we needed to have 3 at least episodes ready to go before we released the first one.
Well, yeah, we released it as a package because we read in the Podcasting for Dummies book, and maybe another resource as well, that the best chance that we had at making it as a podcast was to offer the audience more than just one right out of the chute.
Right.
So that, like, what if our first one really wasn't that great? They'd probably never come back. But if we had 2 others that they could listen to, maybe there'd be one that they would like
Right.
and give us a chance. And so, lucky for us, I think that those first 3 were actually all really great. Do you remember what they were?
Yeah, chronologically, I think I interviewed Carol and Lila Ware first, chronologically. And then we interviewed from Grand Lake Stream, Randy Spencer. And then we interviewed Carter Davidson.
Yeah.
And Carter and I have done a ton together. I mean, we're very close buddies. And so I was leaning on friends with Carter. I knew that Carol had won the Wiggy Robinson Award for being a legendary Maine guide. And I just really admire Carol and Lila for all the work that they've done with promoting guide schools. And I just knew they were a natural home run hit to have them on. And they were wonderful. And Randy Spencer, I've always been intrigued by because I didn't know him, but I knew the story that was really what I thought was the story to tell about how this wonderfully talented Maine guide had been investigated by the Warden Service because of reasons that you'll only have to listen to the episode to know about. But so those first 3 were the first 3. And I remember you sent me the very first episode. I was traveling through my work, and you sent me the raw recording, and I listened to it, and I thought to myself, I was like dancing the jig. I was over the moon. I was like, I find this very entertaining.
Right.
And I can only imagine this will be entertaining for, our guests to hear this. And it did.
Yeah.
It translated.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember those early days where we were doing it virtually, and because there was so much technology involved, I was also involved in that too. So the amount of hours that I put in now is nothing compared to what I used to have to do before we got the handheld device that you could just take with you.
Right. And so, as an example, when we interviewed Nate Bacon, who is a legendary guide from down east, Grand Lake Stream, we had actually mailed him a laptop
Yeah.
and a microphone and gave
like
him
a headset.
and a headset and gave him instructions on where to be and what to do and how to link up and all that. And I always felt we were asking too much of our guests.
Yeah.
And, that really goes back to something else that I want to talk about. I remembered at one point asking one of my really, really important people in my life and in my career to be on the podcast. And they said, well, is it a video podcast? And I said, no, it's an audio podcast. And they said, well, I'm not interested in that. And I remembered feeling very defeated by it. Like, well, if it's not a video podcast, maybe it's not good enough for the audience, or why not? I wasn't going to beg the question. So, but what I found and we found is that so often when I'm having that initial conversation with someone about being on the podcast as a guest and a contributor, they'll say to me, is it an audio or a video podcast? And I'll say it's an audio podcast. And they go, oh, good.
Yeah.
Because they don't want to have to wear nice clothing, or they don't want to have to clean up their living room if I come to their house.
Yeah.
And so it's really added to, what we do to produce a product for people to listen to a conversation, as if you're sitting on a porch listening to two people talk about something without necessarily seeing them.
I think the other thing about having just this handheld device sitting on a tripod off to the side, you don't even notice it's there. Whereas even when you were in Riverside and doing the virtual, you have this feeling like you're being recorded because you're in like a Teams type meeting, and it can be a little awkward feeling sometimes, especially if you look at the camera and you're like, oh, I just made a weird face and I hope that doesn't show up there. And, I think ever since we got this device and it allowed you to just have one-on-one conversations or one with a group or whatever you're doing.
Yeah.
Those conversations have been so much better, more genuine.
Yeah.
I think just less stressful for both maybe you, but for the guests as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, again, reflecting back when we went to the State House and interviewed the governor and Judy, and then not long after that, interviewing Rod McGarry, he came right to the house here. And we sat down in what is now your office, but at the time was my office.
Mm-hmm.
And we just had two guys shooting the shit conversation. And it was great because Rod knows me and I know him, and he could just tell me all sorts of, history about his life and all that, and really go back. But, one of the kind of unintended consequences of being the host of the podcast was that I started to really reflect on the people that I was talking to and listening to them talk about their life story and listening to them basically tell a story of how they were living the dream life that they were living. So, I guided for 25 years as a living, right? If I didn't make enough money in the summertime to get through the winter, the bills didn't get paid. So I had to do a lot of guiding.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was a period of about 10 years where I worked in this other capacity, working for this, engineering company. And it was during the early years of the podcast that it started to occur to me that I was not living the ideal life that I wanted to be living. And I remember distinctly coming home after a Memorial Day trip and being very frustrated with my life, my professional career, and walking into the kitchen and saying, Sheri, I think I should quit my job tomorrow. And you looked me square in the eye and you said, I think you should.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember that?
I do. I remember conversations before then and trying to say, do you think you should? and I don't know, you just wouldn't hear it or couldn't hear it. But I remember feeling like that day was coming, and it was almost a relief for me to hear you finally get to that point, because I felt like you needed to do that.
I've always known I could be successful at guiding. I mean, it's a skill set that either you have it or you don't. And it comes down to being able to deal with people. And I was successful at it when I did it. But all of a sudden someone offers you a job where you're making, a lot of money, and you take advantage of that and you do it. And I did. And it came at the expense of my happiness.
Right.
And it came at the expense of me having to have tolerance being around people that I didn't want to be around,
Yeah.
and having tolerance over what I would consider to be disingenuous. And I was spending the time podcasting with you, recording these conversations with people that were extremely genuine. And all of a sudden I'd have to go back to work and sit in a meeting about quarterly earnings and, reports and all that sort of thing. And I would say to myself, why the hell am I doing this? This sucks. And these people that I work with, a lot of them are very close friends of mine, but some of them are evil. And it just made me want to say, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm going to go back to guiding.
Well, and I think it could also be pointed out that that kind of a job isn't in and of itself bad. It's just that the job that you were working had just transferred to a private equity company, where before you were valued as an employee at least, but once they transferred, you then became a number who needed to meet a quota. And you had to not only meet that quota, you needed to push to get better. And you were already the top. You were the top one there.
Yep. I'll come out and say it. The day that I quit, I was already 70% at my goal for that year for earnings.
Right.
And it was only at the end of the second quarter. And they were not willing to give me a cost of living increase in terms of my pay. And I was told straight to my face, you're doing an awesome job, but I can't tell you that because that would not be reflective of what we want to tell the shareholders.
Yeah, well, they had some sort of a metric that had to be distributed among your team.
Exactly.
And so your supervisor had to figure out how you weren't going to get the metrics you deserved because he only had so many to go around. And that's sadly that is the way it is with a private equity company.
Yep. And it was just as plain as the nose on your face. I was driving home from Moosehead Lake. It was a rainy Monday morning, Memorial Day. And I'm looking through the windshield and I said to myself, you know what you need to do tomorrow? You need to quit your job.
Yeah.
And I did. And it felt great. And I've never felt more happy since leaving that. And I would encourage anybody that ever wakes up in the morning and says, I'm just not doing what makes my heart go pitter pat. You're going to have to make concessions in your life financially, maybe. But, at the end of the day, when I did that, Sheri, the bills were already paid. We didn't really owe a lot of money.
No.
And I just picked up the phone and started calling all my clients, and they all hired me. But it's so funny that I've made clients through the podcast, and also clients have listened to the podcast. So they kind of have this ability to look into what I do outside of just taking them down the river and trying to catch fish. They are like, oh yeah, you do this and you do that with, interviewing different people and all this. And it's been a real gift.
Yeah.
And I kind of think back, like, I don't have any children, so there's not a legacy that I'm going to hand to my children, but I'm constantly reflecting about, like, my father has passed away, right?
Mhm.
And my mother is still with us, but what would I want my parents to be proud of? I would want them to be proud of Michael took the years out of his life with his partner, Sheri, and created a podcast as simple as it may sound, that changed people's lives.
Right.
And it might have changed people's lives that were on the audience end. It might have changed people's lives that were on the guest end of it. And heck, it might have even changed my own life.
I think it did.
And it did change my life. And I absolutely feel like it's the podcast has been an incredible gift in my life, because when I can sit down with somebody and interview them and talk with them and have them open up, it allows me to open up. And when you open up with people, you start to dig deeper underneath the fabric of who you really are as a person. And you can't go to bed at the end of the day and not say to yourself, am I living the life that I want to live? Because that person is. And it just keeps my barometer reading like accurate. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. I've always known from when I was young that I wanted to inspire people. That has always been like my guidepost.
It has been.
I wanted to be somebody who would inspire people in ways that were really heartfelt, but I didn't know what that would look like. And I am such a creative person. And I will say that a lot of times when I think about the podcast, you're the host, you're the voice everyone hears. I don't give it a lot of thought as far as the work that I put into it. It's sort of that I always say, I'm the drummer in the band. You know, you don't even really notice I'm there.
I like that.
And
yeah, but you keep the backbeat.
That's right.
Yeah.
Without me, it doesn't sound the same.
No.
But when I hear stories about you going to teach a fishing school with Alex and somebody's looking at you and you're like, do I know that person? And then later they're like, we love your podcast. And, you know, it's just people really love it. It's very genuine. And they, you know, the work, I just feel so lucky that I've been able to do what I can do to bring this out, not just for you, which has also been important to give you that legacy piece for yourself, but to touch the heart of people around me and in Maine.
And it goes back to, you know, your desire to want to inspire people. You may do it, in this case, indirectly, but in some ways it is direct, because you know that, you know, we've become friends with people, close friends with people that have been on the podcast.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll name a few. John Rogers is a guy who's turned into a friend. Gene Barr is a very close friend of mine. Tom Ackerman has been a very close friend of mine. And it goes on and on. The list goes on and on. But what a gift to be able to pick up the phone and hit dial to somebody and have them answer the phone and say, hey, Mike, how's Sheri doing?
Yeah.
And having a meaningful conversation with them. So, you know, the podcast has turned into a really interesting chapter in our lives. And I say our lives because it's not just my life, it's our life. You know all these people. You listen to them through the headphones, and you also get to meet them in person eventually.
Yeah.
What did we learn along the way?
Well, I learned one of the things that I didn't know when we started the podcast. First of all, I didn't know it was going to be we. I thought it was going to be you. So now sitting here saying, yes, it is our podcast. And I actually, even though we sat down and decided that we were going to try to get to the heart of people and draw out their stories and really draw out the history of Maine fishing, and I didn't really have an understanding of how that would all unfold. And so for me, something that I learned, how do I say it?
Well, I'm going to say it for you. I mean, I think that you've kind of taken on the role of Ken Burns and Robert Redford, in that, you know, if you look at a Ken Burns documentary, or you listen to or watch the movie A River Runs Through It, the movie, or in Ken Burns' case, the documentary is very inspiring. The reason it's inspiring is because of the production work that went into it. And that's what you bring to the table is you're the silent partner that sits back and says, I'm going to put this chess piece in front of that chess piece. I'm going to eliminate that story and I'm going to move this conversational piece into a different location so that it really, you've been able to, it's just like being a movie maker or a director. The production part of it is critical to the success of the podcast.
Yeah.
If it was only the raw footage of me talking to somebody, it would be less than half as interesting as it is, in my opinion. And you do that artfully.
Well, thank you.
No, thank you. I mean, the day that you stop producing the podcast is the day the podcast stops going. Because we've talked about that. We've even said, I was sitting with Chris McKee one day from Geiger Brothers, and Chris is one of my best friends, and we've known each other since childhood. And he's just celebrated so much success in his life, but he also loves the podcast. He's one of our audience members and a very close friend and someone that I spend a lot of time with fishing, and we're tight. We're buddies. And he said, Mike, what's the biggest struggle? And I think he was asking me that because I think he wanted to help. He said, do you want somebody else to, set up the interviews, or would it help if someone did the production end of it? And, when he asked the question, it occurred to me, I can't have anybody else do it but Sheri, because Sheri just does it so correctly. And when we drag it across a finish line on a Sunday night, then it's going to get released on a Tuesday.
Mm-hmm.
I just feel right about it.
Yeah.
I just feel like, you know what? I had this conversation with Paul Cody over in Poland, Maine, and Paul told me a great story, and Sheri captured it. That's, I don't want to say it's 50% me, 50% you. I'd like to say it's 25% me, 75% you.
I don't see it that way. Thank you. I don't see it that way. It is in the conversation. I mean, I can't do anything with nothing. So,
No, you can. You said, I remembered you said recently, Michael could have a conversation with a cat and I could make a podcast episode out of it. That was great.
It might not be very interesting, but
yeah,
we could do it.
So, we have just celebrated 4 seasons or 48 episodes of the Flyline podcast. And I know that you and I have that look. We literally will have coffee in the morning and look at each other like, how long is this going to go on?
Yeah.
And I've even had people who are close to me say, you're going to run out of guests.
Mm-hmm.
And we struggle with that because sometimes it does feel like we don't know who the next guest is going to be. And sometimes we don't know how long this is going to go. But all of a sudden, I'm going to be meeting with some folks that are working on a project about removing the dams on the Androscoggin River, and up comes a name, and up comes, a backstory about what's going on with that person. And I can't think anything other than I want to do another episode with that person being the guest. And 6 degrees of separation, a guy calls me on Sunday and says, I want to hire you to be my guide, in 2 weeks, if you're willing. And the guy that I want to bring with me, his name is Ford. And all of a sudden we get an email a couple of days later from Ford saying, you should really think about interviewing XYZ person for these reasons. And for the audience, this is how it happens.
Right.
This is literally how, sometimes I go, no. And then other times I go, oh, that's a great idea. I didn't know who that person was.
Mm-hmm.
I'd love to learn more about their story. And that's kind of like the genesis of how this whole thing has come about. There's very low-hanging fruit. There's obvious names in the Maine fly fishing community that you want to touch on and you want to interview those people if they're willing.
Well, there have been, I mean, you do know a wide net of people, and there have been some names that I have come across just I think they listen to the podcast and they friend me on Facebook. I don't know. But I say, Michael, have you thought about this person or that person? And you're like, no, I don't know who that is. And I'll do just a little research and I'll say, I think you should call him.
John Rogers.
Yeah, John Rogers was one. Actually, yes, he friended me first. And I mentioned him to you. And then we looked him up and you're like, yeah, set us up with a phone call.
But I also knew John Rogers' son, John, from when I lived in Farmington.
Oh, okay.
And there's always these little 6 degrees of separation of how you might know somebody. And yeah, it that's how it happens. And I also maintain that sometimes you'll have somebody who's kind of a big name in Maine fly fishing, but they don't know how to tell a story. And then you'll get somebody else that you may not recognize their name, but they're an incredible storyteller.
Oh, yeah.
And I just sit back, I shut up and just let them go.
Yeah.
And so many of those people that have risen to the top because they're great storytellers, right? Tom Ackerman's a great example of that.
Yeah.
Tom is a household name in Maine fly fishing. And Gene Barr, another example of a guy that is quiet, but if you lean in, he's got a great story to tell.
He does. And what I love about Gene is he's also a songwriter. And I think that at first he's very quiet. And as you get to talk with him, he starts to open up more and his story becomes just
very revealing.
Yes, he's just so good at how he says things and it's really entertaining.
I have learned with Gene to say less and to listen more because first he doesn't want to be interrupted. None of us want to be interrupted, but he doesn't want to be interrupted. And it takes him a minute to kind of come up with his thoughts, but when he does, they're extremely meaningful. And that's a really endearing credential of a personality, is to have somebody that has something meaningful to say and to capture it. And in Gene's case, I get to sit down with him and listen to him talk a lot because we're only 7 miles away from he and Donna. And he tells me wonderful stories all the time. And it's just wonderful. But well, we're getting close to the end, but I want to also touch on, Sheri, how, I talked about how getting into the podcasting kind of directed me to reconsider my life direction and going back into guiding more on a full-time basis. And I've done that. And you are always looking for the next horizon. And you saw an opportunity. You conducted a wedding for like one of your daughter's friends.
Yeah. Well, I'll start this by saying I have a problem.
Okay.
My problem is that I will find something that I'm interested in, and then I will learn every little bit and piece about it until I cannot learn anything else and I'm done with it. And not only that, but when I'm put to a task, I do it to the absolute best of my ability. If I say yes, you are going to get the 100% or 110% of Sheri Maines. That's just who I am. And so my niece actually got married first. That was a couple of years ago.
And you were not a justice of the peace, but
a notary.
A notary public. So you are allowed to marry people.
Yeah. In Maine, you can be a notary public and marry people. You have to send in for a license. At the time, it was just before that. And so because I married my niece and sent in the paperwork, they just sent me a license. So now I'm licensed. I didn't have to do anything for it. But so when I officiated my niece's wedding, I was nervous. Obviously, I'd never done a wedding before, and I did a lot of research about, the best way to officiate a wedding, and I came across this great resource called Unboring Weddings. And
Unboring weddings.
Unboring Weddings. And I
Drilled down
I
as you
drilled
do.
down. I took the academy. I paid and did an academy class with it and learned how to do an unboring wedding, and I loved it. I loved not just officiating. I mean, anybody could, read a script and give your blessings and go along your way.
We are gathered here today.
Yeah, but the way this goes is you really get to know the couple. And so very much like what you do with your guests, I also drill down into their relationship. How did they meet? What made them fall in love? Everything about their story.
And then carry that into a ceremony with you being the officiant.
Right. I create a love story and I put that in, and that is the centerpiece of the ceremony, and it has gone great.
Yeah.
I have tons of great reviews, but it's not just about getting reviews for me. It's how I feel when I produce a wonderful ceremony. I mean, this is really an important day in a couple's life.
It's quite possibly the most important day in their life.
Right.
And, the other part of it is it's different in this way. You only get one chance.
Right.
When I guide somebody, I might, hey, we had a rainy day. You have to get it right the first time.
I do. Yeah.
So just as, someone's sitting on the sidelines watching all this, what happens is Sheri gets an email. She owns the website, The Main Knot.
The Main Knot.
The Main Knot. Like you're going to tie the knot, K-N-O-T. And you'll get, people that want to renew their vows. You'll get people from out of state that want to get married at the Portland Headlight.
Mm-hmm.
You just took on a major, probably like a $30,000 to $50,000 wedding where there's going to be 8 bridesmaids and and they're going to do, there's going to be a bluegrass band. I mean, it just ranges the whole spectrum of what people do when they get married.
Mm-hmm.
And you make more money marrying somebody than I make in a day of guiding.
I know.
And so I think it's great. And that's their side gig.
Yeah.
And I know you're not doing it for the money, but you do it because you can't stop moving forward.
Yeah.
So, that's the role that you play is you're very, very good at rolling with the punches, rolling with the changes, as the REO Speedwagon song goes.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't get stuck down in the mire, Sheri. You've never done that. And that goes back to the podcast. Like sometimes I'll come back and I'll go, I don't know how that one went. I thought it was okay. And it comes out smelling like a rose when you're done with it. And it's just amazing. It's a testimony to the partnership that we have, and that it's not just me doing the interview at all. It's absolutely, it takes two to tango. And if someone was to try to get into podcasting tomorrow, like it's not easy.
Yeah.
What we do is not easy at all.
Mm-hmm.
And if you only look at what you do, there's a tremendous amount of familiarity you have to have with technology.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that by virtue of the fact that 5 days a week you work with technology, you're not in IT, but you're always working with various computer formats that allow you to learn new skill sets, so that you kind of like very easily work with new programs. So you're always open to taking in, new ways of making it easier. And that is reflected in the final results of what the Flyline podcast is that, we kind of have it down to a recipe now. And so, I would invite for the audience to say, if you could see this podcast go in a new direction, maybe you said, well, you should branch out into New England, or, you should think about having conversations that are more like this or more like that. We invite that feedback. We would love to hear. Do you agree with me?
I do. Because we've been talking about ways to launch it forward. Like, how do we what changes should we make? What should we do going forward? Not that there's anything wrong with the current format. It's just that, like you said, we've got 48 episodes. That's a lot of guests connected to Maine. So then if we start branching out into New England, what does that look like? We have a handheld device. So do you have to travel to people's houses? Like there's just a lot of logistics to think about when you think about changing the format and how we're going to go. But we're not going to get better if we don't change. I mean, change is inevitable.
And to that point, every time I think that we've run out of guests, I meet 4 more that I want to interview.
Yeah.
That are in Maine. So, let's brag a little bit, Sheri. We're the number 1 fly fishing podcast in the Northeast.
We at least were last year. I haven't seen anything this year yet, but
yeah, but anytime we look at the metrics, it always seems like we're at the top on that front. And then you have like outdoor podcasts, and most recently we're the number 2 outdoor podcast.
Yeah, it was through FeedSpot. And
right.
They may not be the only one that measures these, but they reached out to us, and I mean they do have sponsored spots, so I think that like people can pay to get bumped up, but we've never paid for anything like that. So for us to even be in the top 10 is a pretty big deal to me. So it would be easy to be like, here's $50 to put us in number 1, or whatever they charge.
And we don't have to do that because
no, we don't do that.
No, and that's a big thank you to our listeners, because the only way that they get those kind of analytics is because they look at how many episodes there are, how often they get played, how often they get listened to through duration, and also how do people rate them.
Yeah.
Because if you're listening to a podcast that we've done and you have an opportunity to rate it, just like a Google review.
Yeah.
And you
certainly have it on Apple.
And you give it a 5-star rating, whatever it is, that gets back. And all of a sudden, that's where advertisers come in and say, hey, we want to sell merino wool socks for 15 seconds on your podcast. So please, we could use the support.
Yeah.
And we've also thought about maybe doing something where we have hats and water bottles and coffee cups that we give our guests that we have on, but we can sell those things.
Yeah, we could.
And we've never really branched out to putting that out there, but that would be a wonderful way for our guests to support us financially.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that I think you'll probably see happening in the near future, is us saying, here's a little merch. And it may not be about the hat, but it might be about your way as someone that really likes the podcast to contribute. Throw a little bit of coin in our direction, and that might offset the tank of gas that I have to burn to drive up to Camden to interview somebody.
Right.
And that goes a long way to continuing to have this whole project move forward.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I would say that the thing that is maybe the most important to me is to send the message to our guests that have contributed to the last 48 episodes. Because without their contribution of their time and the privilege of their time, there is not a podcast. So everyone put in a little bit of their own life story to share. And that is such a gift to offer, not just you and I, but to the community that we're trying to support. And I want to thank our audience, because we have a tremendous audience, much larger than I ever would have imagined, that has grown over time. And how that works is like this. You hire Dave Pesci as a guide, and you're on his email list, or you're friends with him on Facebook. And all of a sudden, a year later, Dave has a podcast interview with Flyline Podcast, and he shares it, and you listen to it. And then all of a sudden you listen to more, and you share that with somebody that went on a fishing trip with you and Dave. It's just like this spider web. It's incredible how this whole thing kind of just tentacles out. And it's just amazing to me how quickly it has grown and how effectively it has grown. And most importantly, we don't get any negative feedback.
No, we don't. Which, I mean, it doesn't surprise me because I think that we're so positive. Why would we get negative feedback?
Yeah.
But we don't get negative feedback. But to add to what you're saying, I think it's so wonderful to have so many people who share the Facebook posts. They interact with the Instagram posts as well. And they're, the posts themselves are just, hey, here's what's coming up for next week. And people will comment or they'll go back and say, I just listened to that episode and it was really great. You got to, loved it or whatever. And it's that interaction that also helps to push it out to a wider audience as well.
Yeah, every time I wake up in the morning and I see that I have a message from somebody that says, it really touched my heart to hear that conversation you had with this person, it reminds me that we're doing the right thing.
Yeah.
And, we're not getting rich doing this. We're losing money, as you and I have talked about.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the reward. The reward is not financial. The reward is something that you will be able to say in your dying days, we did something to try to connect people to something that really meant something to us.
Mm-hmm.
And the fly fishing community really means something to me. And I think it's turned into something that's meant something for you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So thanks, everybody. Thank you to all the guests. Thank you to all of the listeners. Thank you to all the supporters. And please give us any feedback you have as to any changes you'd love to see, any guests you'd like to hear from that we haven't interviewed yet. And Sheri, close it out.
All right. This brings us to the end of another Flyline podcast season.
That brings us to the end of this episode. Thank you for joining us for this intimate discussion, and thank you for listening to Flyline Podcast. We're proud to be sponsored by Geiger, the world's largest family-owned promotional products distributor based in Lewiston, Maine. Their support helps us share the rich history of Maine's fishing community through the stories that will be cherished for generations. A new Flyline Podcast episode is released every 2 weeks on Tuesdays, so be sure to come back to meet our next famous guest. Until then, this is Michael Jones, and we invite you to visit the blog section of our website to enjoy photos and contributions from our guests and experience all of the episodes at flylinepodcast.com.